The courtroom was a vacuum. Sound had been sucked out, leaving only the thick, heavy pressure of anticipation. It was a silence so profound you could almost hear the dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. Every eye was fixed on the oak door at the side of the room, the door the jury would walk through. Time had ceased to flow, stretching and compressing with every shared, anxious glance. The air, stale with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and human anxiety, felt electric. It was the kind of stillness that precedes a storm, a quiet that promised a violent, life-altering conclusion. Everyone waited. The judge, the lawyers, the families, the press, the accused. Daniel Carter sat ramrod straight at the defense table. His knuckles were white where he gripped the table's edge. His cheap suit, the best he owned, seemed to hang off his frame. Beside him, his lawyer, Jake Briggins, projected an aura of calm he did not feel. Jake's gaze was locked on that door. He had done everything he could. He had argued. He had objected. He had performed for the jury. Now, it was out of his hands. The fate of his client rested with 12 ordinary people who held an extraordinary power. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, Rufus Buckley, wore a confident smirk. It was a practiced look, one he had perfected over hundreds of trials. He shuffled his papers, not because they needed organizing, but because the silence was getting to him too. He glanced at the victim's family, seated in the front row. Their faces were masks of grief and hope. The weight in the room was not just silence. It was the combined weight of all these hopes and fears. The court clerk fidgeted with a pen, clicking it softly, until a sharp look from the judge made him stop. The sound, though minuscule, had been a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. Even the hardened reporters in the back, men and women who had seen it all, were still. Their notebooks were open, their pens poised. They knew this was the moment. The story wasn't in the weeks of testimony, it was here, in the final agonizing seconds before the foreman spoke. The entire trial, with all its legal maneuvering and emotional testimony, had been distilled into this single, unbearable point of suspended animation. The door remained closed, the waiting continued. Daniel Carter was not a sympathetic defendant. A former security guard with a temper and a history of small-time trouble, he was accused of the one thing that seemed to fit his profile: armed robbery gone wrong. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculating man who shot a convenience store clerk in a moment of panic. Carter maintained his innocence. He claimed it was a case of mistaken identity, that he was miles away at the time. His alibi was flimsy, backed only by a friend with a questionable past. Throughout the trial, Carter's face had been a stone, his emotions locked away, which jurors could read as the calm of an innocent man, or as the coldness of a killer. His lawyer, Jake Briggins, was a small-town attorney who took on impossible cases. He saw a flicker of desperation in Carter's eyes he believed was real. Jake's plan: don't prove innocence, dismantle the state's case piece by piece. He hammered at inconsistencies, a blurry surveillance video, a witness who changed their story, and a murder weapon that was never found. He worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a belief the system could be wrong. He was outgunned and outfinanced, but he had a knack for connecting with jurors and showing the human behind the charge. On the other side stood Rufus Buckley, an ambitious district attorney aiming higher. For Buckley, this case was a stepping stone. A conviction would be headlines and votes. He presented a slick, polished case. He had forensic experts, a tearful eyewitness, and a mountain of circumstantial evidence. Buckley was a storyteller, telling a tragic story of greed and violence. He argued with passion and precision, pointing at Carter as a menace. He was confident, too confident perhaps. And then there were the 12, the jury. A collection of citizens plucked from their ordinary lives. A retired teacher, a mechanic, a young mother, a bank teller. The case against Daniel Carter was built on a foundation that seemed solid at first glance. The prosecution presented an eyewitness, a customer who had been in the store during the robbery. She had identified Carter in a police lineup. "That's him," she had said, her voice trembling. "I'll never forget that face." Buckley replayed her testimony in his closing, her words hanging like a death sentence. They had partial fingerprint evidence on the counter, a print matching Carter's left thumb. It wasn't a perfect match, it was close. Buckley argued close was close enough when combined with everything else. The motive was debt. Lots of it. Carter was behind on rent and owed money to unsavory characters. Yet Jake Briggins had done his job. He chipped away at that foundation until cracks appeared. Under cross, the eyewitness admitted the robber wore a baseball cap pulled low. She said the whole ordeal lasted less than a minute. It was dark, it was fast, you were scared. "Isn't that right, ma'am?" Jake asked gently. She conceded it was. Jake called a fingerprint expert who said partial prints are notoriously unreliable. The smudge on the counter could have belonged to thousands of other people. The lack of a murder weapon was a gaping hole Jake kept returning to. The alibi was the defense's weakest point, but Jake tried to bolster it. Carter claimed he was playing poker with his friend Miles. The prosecution tore Miles apart, revealing prior convictions for petty theft. Buckley called him a liar, a friend covering for a friend. Jake tried to rehabilitate Miles on redirect, portraying him as a flawed man telling the truth now. "He has no reason to lie for me," Carter insisted on the stand. "We're not that close." It was a strange defense, but it was all they had. One more seed of uncertainty planted in the jury. The jury had to navigate a maze of conflicting information. Was the eyewitness credible? Or was her memory tainted by trauma? Was the fingerprint solid evidence? Or just a random coincidence? The first vote in the jury room was a shock. The foreman asked for a show of hands. "All those who vote guilty." 11 hands went up, only one hand stayed down. It belonged to juror number 7, Sarah, a young librarian who'd paid meticulous attention. The room fell silent. 11 jurors stared at her with annoyance and disbelief. A gruff construction foreman spoke first. "Are you kidding me? It's an open and shut case. The guy's a bum and he got caught." He voiced what many were thinking. They wanted to go home. Sarah stood her ground. She was nervous, barely a whisper at first, then she spoke with conviction. "I'm not sure," she said, looking around. "The eyewitness, she wasn't certain. Mr. Briggins made that clear." "And the fingerprint?" "The expert said it wasn't a perfect match." She reminded them of the judge's instructions. It wasn't about what they felt in their gut. It was about the evidence. "There's no gun," she added. "They never found the gun. How can we convict a man of murder without the murder weapon?" The room grew tense. Arguments broke out. Voices were raised. They split into two opposing sides. For hours they went back and forth. They re-examined the evidence. They pulled out the blurry surveillance photo. They studied the fingerprint card. The construction foreman insisted you must look at the whole picture. "You add it all up. The witness, the print, the motive. The knock on the courtroom door was like a gunshot. Everyone jumped. The bailiff opened it. The 12 jurors filed in. They looked exhausted. They avoided eye contact, faces grim and unreadable. They took their seats in the jury box. Daniel Carter looked like he was about to be sick. He stared at them, searching their expressions. Jake Briggins placed a steadying hand on his client's shoulder. The silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. This was it, the end of the line. The court clerk turned to the foreman.
"Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict?"
Mr. Abernathy stood up. He held a single piece of paper that trembled. He cleared his throat. He looked at the judge, then at the clerk. Finally, toward Daniel Carter. Jake thought he saw a flicker of something. He couldn't be sure what. Pity? Regret? It was impossible to tell.
"On the charge of murder in the first degree."
He paused to compose himself, and the entire room held its breath. Time seemed to stop. Seconds felt like hours. Carter squeezed his eyes shut. The victim's family leaned forward, clutching each other's hands. Rufus Buckley's smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of raw anticipation. The foreman unfolded the paper.
"We the jury?"
He took a deep breath. "Find the defendant, Daniel Carter." Every person in the room leaned in, straining to hear the final life-altering word.
"Not guilty."
The words fell into the silence, and for a moment, no one reacted. Daniel Carter collapsed forward, his body shaking with silent, heaving sobs as Jake Briggins held him.